What up, what up, what up? I'm Matthew Msingati, the designer and developer. This is my YouTube channel, Coded Design, where I teach coding and user interface design. This is my crash course, Conceptual Object-Oriented Programming, and this is video number 6. In this tutorial, we're going to discuss static properties and methods. Okay, let's go back to our initial analogy or theory about a house plan resembling a class and a house itself, and the house itself resembling an object. Let's establish two environments for these entities. A plan is an entity unto itself, so meaning that it is something, and also a house is an entity unto itself, meaning that also a house is something. But these two things, they live in different environment. As much as a house is being created from a plan, but a house is a separate object from the plan. A plan, it's conceptual. You cannot touch it. As much as you can touch the paper and the ink, but you cannot really touch the plan, because a plan, it's some sort of a concept. It's more like it appeals to the mind, to the functioning of the mind. However, a house is a concrete object. It's something that you can see, feel, and touch. So what I'm trying to establish here is different object and different environment, because the same thing happens when it comes to classes and the object created from classes. In object-oriented programming, we tend to treat these as the same thing, like a class is also an object is also a class, which at some point it brings confusion. So, as I've established before, that we've got two distinct objects and we've got two distinct environment. Let's take a plan, for instance. A plan has got all the information and the instruction for building a house, but however, a plan has got some instructions that, or information that you will never ever actually see in a house. Let's just make an example. As you can see, a house as a physical object, it's too big. Maybe it's whatever meters or centimeters or whatever, but it's big in size. A house cannot fit inside an A4 paper or an A3 paper as it is, but it can fit as a plan. And then the person who's responsible for designing the house plan will give us some sort of a scale or a ratio to tell us that for every meter of a physical house in a plan, it's represented as a centimeter. So the person who's executing the plan now knows that for every centimeter I see in this small paper represent a meter into a physical house. Now when you look at the physical house, the one that you can touch, see, and feel, it's very beautiful. It just got the material, the windows, and beautiful finishing, and the furniture. But you can never say this is the scale of the house, or the scale of the house was 1 into 3 or 3 into 1, because that is the information that at first you don't really care about when you are looking at the house, because you are appreciating the beauty and also the form of it, and at the same time you can't see that. But when you look at the plan, you can see the scale. The builder, the person who's responsible for building the house, they can see that, okay, this is my scale. So what I'm trying to say here, the point is there is an information that remains in a plan, in that concept, that will never ever like transpires, or you will never ever see on a finished building. So the plan as an entity unto itself, it has got some information that are reserved, let's say, only for it, or that will remain only in a plan, that you won't see in a physical well-built house. Now let's take this into object-oriented programming. As we have said before, that in object-oriented programming we've got a class that has got the properties. So the properties are some variables of that class. We have other variables of this class, but those variables are called static properties and also static method. So static properties, they are variables of this class, but they are meant for the class, not the instances of a class. Meaning that just like the scale which will remain in a plan, you will never see it in a well-built house. Properties, they belong to the class itself. So if then I create an object from a class and the object has got all the properties that are in that class, what do you mean when you are saying a class can have the variables that will remain in that class? First, establish that these are two distinct entities. Don't use a class and an object interchangeably. These are distinct objects. The other one, in terms of plan and a house, the other one, it's a concept. It has got its rules of engagement. And the other one, it's a house. It has got its own rules of engagement. A plan being conceptual, which appeals to the inner working and functionalities of the mind, it must be interpreted. A house being a more visual structure, it appeals to the eye. If it's Q, you can easily see that it's Q, so it appeals to the eye. However, back in our mind, we know that even the eye is controlled by the mind. I'm aware of that. So now let's talk object-oriented programming. We've got static properties which belong only to a class. So if this class has got a static property and an object has been created from it, the object obviously can access that static property. Of course it can access, but that static property belongs to a class. So the method in which it is going to access that static property is different from the method in which it uses to access the properties of an instance, which is the object properties. And also, when we are declaring static properties and method, we declare them differently from the normal properties. So if you don't understand this at the moment, let's get into code, then things are gonna be clear. So we already have some properties here. So now let's declare a static property. Let's say this static property is gonna be count. So this is how you declare it. Static count. Okay, let's say static count is equal to 0, an integer. So this variable belongs to this class. As you can see, when we are declaring it differently from this general or normal property of a class. We use a keyword static to tell or to show that it belongs to a class. So that's a declaration. So now let's come to the practical use of it. Okay, before, when we displayed display name of Nokia, then the name was Nokia. When we displayed call display name for this object pencil, the name was pencil. But now let's just display, okay, now let's just display, let me remove this because we don't really need it now for this case. We don't need the numbers. Save. Let's just quickly refresh to see if the page is gonna be blank. 100%, we're happy with that. So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna display the static property. That's what we're gonna display now. Now we're not gonna use an arrow function, just like the same way we were accessing the the normal properties of that class. Now we're gonna use these two dots. I forgot the name of these dots, but we're just gonna use these two colons. I think it's two colons to access that static property, which is, in this case for us, it was count. Okay, now as you can see, when we are accessing that property count, we are not using an arrow function anymore. We just use these double colons, and then we access that property count. So for now, let's see what will be displayed. It's 0. Why? Because this static property is 0. Okay, let's see if we can use this one. We have used the object Nokia. Now let's see if we can use the object pencil. Okay, Nokia and pencil, one and the same thing. So at this point in time, you might feel like, Matthew, what's the point? Because our objects can still access the static property just like other general properties, the one that we've accessed using an arrow function. This object can access it, and this object can access it. Okay, now let me take you to another method of accessing the same static property. Remember, we said the static property belongs to a class itself. So now let's access the static property from the class itself, and then let's even write here accessing from the class. So now we are accessing the static property, but now using the class itself. So meaning that we don't need to create a new object, because this static property doesn't really belong into an object. The object can be used as a transport to accessing that static property, but the static property belongs to the object itself. Okay, then let's just type here the class name. So here PHP declared a class items. This is the name of the class. So this name, we are using it here because it's a class that we can access. It's more like a plan that we can always go back and say that, oh, this what was in this house plan. So now we are using that house plan items directly to access the static property. Let's see what will happen. Undefined variable pencil on line 55. I have made a mistake. Maybe I might have deleted something. Okay, this is Nokia count. This is pencil on line 55. Count. Okay, let's just quickly check. Undefined variable pencils on line 55. Unquote. Class name must be a valid object or string on line 55 also. Okay, let's see what I might have done. Oh, there is pencils here. Okay, again refresh. As you can see, just a moment, I forgot to put a breaking tag here so that there could be a space between this and the 0. Okay, now as you can see, we have used the Nokia object, we have used the pencil object, and also here we have used the class itself. Okay, fine. Still, at this point in time, the point is not clear, but at least you can get a sense that, okay, the static method, I can use the class directly to access it. But the idea that this variable belongs to a class, it's not that clear at the moment. I understand it might seem a little bit confusing because I can still use this object to access that class. However, now let's try to make it as clear as possible so that you can see that the property belongs to a class. What if we can change the value? What if we can change the value of count? What if through the object Nokia and change it to, let's say, 17? Can you guess what will be the impact on all other counts that we are displaying here if we can change that value? Obviously, for now, the means of transport to accessing that static variable, even though it belongs to a class, we have used Nokia. But what if we can change that? What will be the impact on all other variables? Okay, let's quickly see. It changes everywhere. So now this is my first point directing to, or giving you the idea that this variable belongs to a class itself. So whenever you change it anywhere, you are changing the same variable. This is the first difference between a general class property and a static property. Now if you change it here, it changes everywhere. Now let's access the name Nokia and then change it using the object Nokia and see if is the name for the object pencil going to change. Of course it's not going to change because this property here, it belongs to this object. It has got nothing to do with this property here. But when it comes to a static property, as much as we might have used this object as the medium of transportation, but it doesn't uniquely belong to Nokia. I hope you see the difference. But however, we're gonna continue and do some more practical coding so that it can be clear also to you. So now let's see which is a public property of this. Item price is public. Okay, let's just use item price. Okay, let's say here we take the object Nokia. Here we're assigning a price of 500. Now let's assign a price of item price. Item price is equal to, let's assign a price of 250. 250. Now look at the difference. This is how we access a static variable, and this is how we access a general property of a class. So this way of accessing it, we are using this property. But however, as much as it is in our blueprint, in our plan, but you will see it on the actual physical house. For instance, if on the plan there is an item which is labeled Windows, aluminium, whatever, blah blah blah, you can see that visually or physically on the actual plan. So meaning that this item price, it's something that you will see on the objects, here, you will see it below because it belongs to that unique object or that house. You can visually see it, hence here we can reference to it and change it here. Now let's call a method from Nokia as an object. Let's call a method display price. Now it's like we have only changed display price. Let's also call display price but for an item which is a pencil. But for an item which is a pencil, I want to show you that these prices are uniquely attached to the objects that were used when on the instantiation phase. So they are uniquely tied to these objects, that the price. So let's say display price here. Let me just put some spaces between my values. There's space here, I'm happy with that. And also where I'm displaying price, there must be a space here. Okay, let's go back, run it and see. Okay, an error, undefined property item display price on line 50. Maybe I've made some spelling mistake, and also on line 60. Okay, let's see, maybe the display price is the one that was private. Let's quickly check what's going on. Okay, display price is public, and let's copy the spelling as it is from here. Maybe I might have made a spelling mistake. Nokia. Oh, okay, this is a method and this is a method. Save it, run. Voila. Now in terms of displaying the price, we've got 250. We have changed the price of that specific object. And what was the object? So Nokia, it's a cell phone. We have changed specifically the price of that object. When it comes to 2 rand, the pencil, it remains the same. But however, when it comes to a static variable, when Nokia changes the value of a static property, it changes everywhere because the property doesn't really belong to the instances of the object, but it belongs to the class itself. I hope now at least things are a bit clearer than before. Let's change it to 567 and see. Suppose it changes everywhere. 567, 567 and 567. Okay, now let's make it more practical. I'm all about simplified simplicity. As much as it's simple, or it's already been simplified, but let's simplify the simplicity so that now it can be clearer to you that this static method belongs to a class itself, not the object or the instances. Okay, now let's change the static method. Okay, it's already count. Now in our constructor, what we said the constructor is in the previous video, it's a function, it's a method that is called by default whenever you create an instance of a class. As soon as you type new items, this method is called automatically. So it's called when you create item Nokia and when you create item pencil. Even if when you are creating another item, as long as there is a new keyword, this is being executed. So meaning that we can use it as a method that will help us to increment, so that we can calculate how many times were this class instantiated, or how many objects that have been created from this class. How are we going to do that? We just simply go here and say this, that means this instance, and use double colons, and then we access the count variable. And as you can see, when we're using an arrow function, we don't really put the $sign, but when we are accessing a static variable, as you can see, we access it with a $sign. Okay, and then from then, as you can see here, we don't have the $sign, but here in the static variable we put the $sign. Then let's go to our client code and some sort of delete all the lines of code that are overriding all the lines of code that are overriding the count, and only leaves those that are only displaying it. This one is overriding count, let me delete it, and this one is overriding count. Which one? Overriding count. Okay, the other ones are just displaying count. I'm happy about that. So now let's see the result and explain. Okay, when we are creating an instance of this class on Nokia, as you can see, we have changed the item price to 250. That's not a problem, and we're displaying it. That's not a problem. We're displaying it here. That's 250. We are cool with that. And then when we are displaying count, a static property count, it's our first time where we were creating an instance of item. So we've got number 1, because on the constructor, this constructor, we are adding 1. Okay, I forgot to mention, this is a shorthand for instance, let's say this was just a normal variable. Usually in programming, if you want to increment a variable by 1, you will take that variable and say equal to that variable plus 1. So this instruction takes 0 and say 0 plus 1 and assign that to this. So when you move, then this in here in this line of code, this count will be 1. When you do it again, it will take that 1 is equal to, it will say 1 plus 1 and assign all of that to this one, then it's going to be 2. But however, this count plus plus is a shorthand for that, so that's what this thing does. It always adds 1 to the previous number that was there. So whenever we call the construct method while we were creating the Nokia object, the initial number was 0, and we incremented it by 1 using this instruction, and then from then it was 1. That's why we have 1 here. However, in the client code, when we instantiated a new object, even though it was a pencil, then that's why when we are displaying it here, now it's 2. Now it's 2. Even when we are accessing the same static variable, when we are accessing the same static variable using using items, straight item, you can see that it's still 2, because that variable belongs to a class, not to instances. So let's just wrap things up nicely. We've got a plan and we've got a house created from plan. There are things that belong to the plan as a conceptual entity, and there are things that belongs to a house as a visual entity. Some things you see from a plan and you see from the house, like aluminium windows, you see there. But if we are talking about scaling the house, 1 centimeter is equal to 1 meter, you can't see that visually on the house. So let's take that into a programming perspective, or object-oriented programming. Then we've got a class that is an entity unto itself, as much as it's responsible for creating, or from it we create duplicates or we create objects. But however, it is an entity. It has got variables that belongs to it that will remain the class variables. Those variables are static variables or static properties, and even in terms of method the same thing applies. That's why when we've got a static method, we can access it obviously using the object, but we are just accessing it. We are not saying we are accessing a static method for a Nokia. No, we are saying we are accessing a static method for the class items. Even if we are using pencil as an object, we are not accessing a static method for pencil just like other methods, a static property just like other properties. We are saying we are accessing a static property of a class through the object. So this video, I was supposed to continue and do static method, because here we are doing static properties and methods, static properties and also static method. But however, I'm gonna split this video into two videos, since I feel like this one is already long enough and it's loaded with a lot of things that I feel like you need some time, a break, to really think about things and let this sink into your mind. And also maybe you can repeat this video again so that you can understand it. And then on the next video, which is my video number 7, will be about static methods, where I will explain how static method works. But however, let me promise you, the same thing that happens with static variable, it will be the same thing that will happen with static method. No different. Those methods belongs to a class itself. That is about it. If you feel like this video is adding some sort of value into your overall understanding of object-oriented programming and also like static properties and static method, please subscribe. In the next video, I was supposed to be doing inheritance, but now I have changed that. Sorry about that. I have changed that. I'm gonna be doing, so this video was more like static property, and the next one, which is number 7, tutorial number 7, is gonna be about static methods, and this one is going to be video number 8, and this one is going to be video number 8. That is it for me, Matthew Singati, the designer and developer. Thank you for watching the course up to this.